A millionaire woman made an unexpected offer to an ordinary man. Just one night. No contact. $1 million just to stay. But the man, without stopping folding the towel, replied, "I won't be sold, not in my daughter's eyes. No matter the price." That refusal didn't just shatter a woman's offer. It shook the entire world she thought she understood. Because some decisions are made in silence. And some people remind us of the things money can never buy. This is the story of how a man changed a woman's entire life, simply by choosing to stay. And it all began with one word: no. Lucas was still folding the last customer's towel that day, just before closing time. His tired hands moved with an automatic rhythm, while his mind wandered to what he had to do next, picking up his daughter Elena from school. He worked at a simple, small, but peaceful spa center. Everything was ordinary. Pale beige walls, the scent of aromatherapy that had long become unnoticeable, the usual jazz playing on the radio, until the door opened, and a woman stepped in who swept away the meaning of everything around him. There was no rush in her steps, but each one felt as if she were burying her past with every movement. The dark silk dress she wore fell on her body without a single wrinkle, without being flashy. Her voice, her first sentence, shook all of Lucas's assumptions. The woman offered him $1 million for a single night. No touching, no intimacy, just to be there, just to stay. At first, her voice sounded almost mechanical, but there was something trembling at the edges of her words, like a nearly invisible crack. Lucas didn't know who she was. He had never heard the name Evelyn Sommer. Yet she was the name behind investment holdings, venture capital funds, global empires. But to Lucas, she was just a customer. He saw her posture, her tired but unbroken body, the determination in her eyes like a storm held back. And his answer stood like a wall between them: no. When he told her he didn't want her money, that he cared more about how his daughter would remember him, her eyes flickered for the first time. There was no surprise or anger in them, just the quiet shock of hearing a sentence she hadn't heard in a long time. This woman had never been rejected, not even by the people she had brought to their knees. But Lucas hadn't even seen her. He had only seen a tired human being. Then he offered her the waiting room outside, told her she could stay there if she wanted. The couch was empty. Evelyn didn't move at first. There was a long silence, like a queen deciding whether or not to step down from her throne. Then, without saying a word, she nodded and went to sit in the corner of the room. Lucas continued his work from where he left off. 20 minutes passed. When Lucas came out of the back office, the woman was still there. She was staring out at the empty parking lot through the glass, hands resting in her lap, not even touching her phone. It was like she was feeling the weight of nothing happening for the first time. As Lucas walked by, she asked something in a voice barely louder than a whisper. "What kind of woman do you think I am?" Lucas stopped, turned to look at her, but didn't judge. He said labeling someone in 5 seconds could lead to a lifetime of being wrong. Evelyn's lips trembled, then her voice dropped again, almost inaudible. She said she had been fighting for 12 years to make sure the world didn't think she was fragile, but still couldn't sleep at night. Lucas didn't question her or try to comfort her. He just said he understood, because sometimes silence is the only thing that can heal a person. That night, when Evelyn fell asleep on the couch, Lucas brought her a blanket. He gently placed it on her shoulders and walked away. But when the woman slightly opened her eyes, Lucas was still there. And in that moment, Evelyn felt for the first time what it meant to be seen without being looked at. The next morning, Evelyn stood behind the glass windows of her penthouse, looking out at the city, but the view she was so used to didn't feel the same anymore. The skyscrapers admired by others, the success stories, the rise from nothing narratives. For the first time, they didn't feel like they belonged to her. Her coffee sat cold, the croissant untouched, because one scene kept replaying in her mind. The look in the eyes of the man folding towels in that small spa room. No fear, no expectation, no curiosity, just honesty. And even that was enough to stir a feeling she had forgotten for years. That day, when her assistant walked in, Evelyn didn't ask about any conferences or look at her schedule. Instead, she just said one sentence: "Get the car ready. No security. No media. I know where I'm going." When the driver hinted that part of town might not be very safe, Evelyn simply put on her sunglasses and told him to be quiet. Because this time, she didn't want anyone to know her name, only who she was. She didn't want to go there as a CEO, but as a person just looking for peace. And when she stepped inside, Lucas's face didn't change at all. As if he had been expecting her, he simply said, "Hello." Evelyn didn't ask for a massage or treatment this time. She said she just wanted to talk. In that moment, the distance between them was no longer the hierarchy between a company CEO and an ordinary employee. Now, it was just two people sitting face to face. One, a woman trying to remember who she was by erasing all her titles. The other, a man who hadn't run from the scars of his past but learned to live with them. Maybe that first night had only been a test for Evelyn. But now, she realized the answer to that test had drawn the truest line in her life. She now understood that her offer to Lucas had never been about a deal but a cry for help. And Lucas had been one of the rare people who could hear the silence inside that cry. Now Evelyn knew. This man wasn't selling anything, didn't want anything, and wasn't trying to prove anything. He just was. And that alone was worth more than $1 billion empire. Lucas came to the spa early in the morning, just like always. He opened the windows, refolded the towels, and lit the incense sticks. On his way to drop off his daughter at school, he hadn't paid attention to the political news or economic updates on the morning radio. He was trying not to tie his inner peace to any other rhythm. But something was different that morning. Outside, the weather was unusually still. It was like even the city had held its breath, sensing that something was coming. Then, the door opened again. This time, when Evelyn walked in with a little girl who looked about 6 years old, Lucas's gaze truly shifted for the first time. The child she brought with her wasn't hers, but she had trusted him enough to hand over someone else's child. That wasn't a casual gesture in Evelyn's world. It was a message. I never trusted anyone with a child, but now I'm watching you. The girl's name was Lenny. She had colorful bracelets on her fingers and a fluffy toy in her hand. She looked at Lucas like she already knew him. When the little girl came up and asked honestly, "You're the guy who didn't take the money, right?" Evelyn stepped back slightly. That tiny sentence had built a bridge that adults often couldn't. Lucas simply nodded and smiled. In that moment, Evelyn realized the bond Lucas had with children was a kind of truth she had never felt in corporate meetings. And right then, she sat back down in that corner chair. This time not as a CEO, but maybe, for the first time, as a woman. She put her phone in her bag, turned off her notifications, and for the first time, she felt that no email was more important than this. As Lucas started showing Lenny a few yoga moves, Evelyn just watched. Normally, she would observe people's interactions with kids, take notes, make strategic deductions. But now, she was just watching. Every glance, every joke, even every quiet moment between them softened something inside her. Everything happening in that little room inside the spa was what was missing in her giant corporate boardrooms: authenticity. At one point, Lenny asked, "Why don't you work at a big company? You're really smart." Lucas bowed his head slightly and said he only felt peaceful when he could see the sky. That sentence gave Evelyn chills, because she couldn't even remember the last time she had really looked at the sky. As time passed, silence turned into conversation, conversation into confession, and confession into transformation. While Evelyn sat quietly in a corner, she started digging through her past. She was questioning for the first time what her father had taught her from a young age: showing weakness is falling. But everything about Lucas showed not suppressed strength but healed fragility. That day, Evelyn told Lucas about the miscarriage she'd had years ago, the sense of motherhood she had buried without telling anyone, and the womanhood she had forgotten. Lucas didn't interrupt, didn't ask questions, he just listened. For the first time, Evelyn felt the power of people who stay by your side without offering anything. And she felt that power in that gray-walled room. Then something completely unexpected happened. Evelyn's phone rang. The message was from Charles, her ex-fiancé, the man who still lived in Evelyn's shadow in the eyes of business partners. The message included a photo. It showed Evelyn at the door of Lucas's spa, and underneath was a threatening line. "This photo is enough to shake your throne." Evelyn suddenly felt breathless. It wasn't the photo itself, it was the intent behind it that hurt her. When Lucas saw the pale look on her face, he didn't ask anything. He just said, "If you want to leave, you can go now." But Evelyn didn't run. She stood her ground. Where Charles tried to bring her down, she wanted to rise. She wasn't fighting this time, she was just standing as she was. That evening, Evelyn came to Lucas's house. Not out of exhaustion this time, but carrying the weight of a decision. They went into the small kitchen. They chopped onions, boiled pasta. They talked. Evelyn didn't speak her feelings for Lucas out loud, but she made it clear that she felt safe with him, that for the first time she was imagining the possibility of belonging somewhere. Lucas simply stayed with her. He didn't make promises or pull away. Because some bonds aren't formed with words, they form in silence. That night, Evelyn felt truly hungry for the first time. And maybe, for the first time, when she finished a meal, she didn't feel emptiness but fullness. When tears rolled down her cheeks, Lucas didn't offer her a tissue or try to comfort her. He just stood there, because sometimes just being there is everything. Even though things looked calm on the outside in the days following Evelyn's threatening message, the cracks inside her were getting deeper. The few quiet hours she had spent at the spa kept echoing in her mind, while the shadow of Charles lingered over her every step. He wasn't just someone who could shake Evelyn's public position, he was a hunter who fed off her past, her weaknesses, and her vulnerabilities. Years ago, at a moment when Evelyn's career was starting to rise, Charles had inserted himself into her life, bringing his darkness with him as he got closer to her light. Back then, their relationship had felt like an equation stuck between business partnership and emotional manipulation. Eventually, Evelyn had managed to cut ties with Charles, but he still tried to claim a piece of the power he thought he helped her build. And now, with that photo in his hands, he was planning to stir up waves in the media. When Lucas found out what was happening, he showed no reaction in front of Evelyn. He simply said, "You need to be ready for this." But inside, a quiet tension was growing. Because Lucas had seen a woman fight the nightmares of her past and try to reclaim her life before. And that time, everything had fallen apart. His own past was tucked away in an old box in the back room. Unopened letters, court documents, a few old photos, and among them, the thing that silenced him the most, the dark shadow of a broken marriage. Elena's mother had mistaken Lucas's silence for coldness and eventually escaped to another world. Since that day, Lucas hadn't completely opened up his life or secrets to any woman. But Evelyn was different, because even when she tried to hide herself, she carried in her eyes a silent plea to be seen. And Lucas didn't want to let her carry that weight alone anymore. Calls to the spa had started to increase. Hidden numbers, familiar voices, people trying to get information without saying they were journalists. The small place Evelyn had stepped into quietly just a few weeks ago was no longer invisible. One afternoon, a black sedan pulled up to the front door of the spa. The windows were tinted. While Evelyn was inside, a man stepped out of the car and came in, scanning the place. There was no direct threat in his eyes, but every move he made felt cold and calculated. Without introducing himself, he started talking. He mentioned technical details from the spa's license to fire safety regulations. "This place is small enough to draw attention, but too impactful to silence," he said. When Lucas heard those words, he knew what he had to do. He brought Evelyn into the office, closed the door, and for the first time looked her straight in the eyes and asked, "Are you ready? Because this isn't just your story anymore." Evelyn lowered her head, but what was in her eyes wasn't fear, it was something else, determination. "I'm ready," she said, but not alone. That night, Lucas showed a piece of his past to Evelyn for the first time. He opened that old box in the back office. He showed her the emotional loneliness he had lived through during his marriage, the heavy letters where his wife had blamed him for her failures, the signs of a mother who hadn't even shown up to their daughter's birthday party. Evelyn read the pages in silence, because every sentence revealed just how deep Lucas's silence really ran. At that moment, their bond wasn't just two wounded people connecting, it was two equal warriors recognizing each other. When Evelyn looked up at him, she didn't say a word. Lucas didn't speak either. They just accepted each other's presence in that frozen moment in time. The next morning, Evelyn activated a kind of strength she hadn't used in years. She called her press advisor. But this time, she didn't want a crisis management plan. Instead, she planned a video where she would tell her own story. With no makeup, in a simple outfit, just one camera and one light, she sat on the back porch of Lucas's house. She began with, "Power doesn't always have to be loud." Then she talked about her journey, her rise, Charles's games, the emptiness inside her, and finally, the night she spent at the spa. She didn't mention Lucas by name but said that one night, a man changed a woman's life just by refusing the money. She ended with this line, "It wasn't money that saved me, it was a no." The video went live that same day. At first, there was silence. Then the comments, the shares, the articles, and a wave of growing support. Thousands of people saw pieces of themselves in Evelyn's words. But that support didn't make Charles back off. In fact, it made him angrier. And this time, he chose a different target, Lucas. He started digging into Lucas's past, his old jobs, custody case records. A government inspection was sent to the spa. A shutdown order was issued, citing a supposed issue with the electrical panel. When Lucas told Evelyn what had happened, she didn't hesitate for a second. "Then we'll open somewhere else," she said. But Lucas shook his head. "No," he said. "We're not going to fight him his way. He can't silence me, but I won't let him dim your light either." Evelyn stopped. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then, for the first time, she walked over to Lucas and rested her head on his shoulder. "I don't get my light from you. You are the light." That day, Evelyn gathered the company's board of directors. She shared everything: Charles's manipulation, the documents he held, the attacks on the spa. She wasn't just defending herself anymore, she was going on the offensive. But this fight wasn't about image management anymore. It was about a woman reclaiming her life. And Lucas was at the heart of it all, with his simplicity, his honesty, his steady silence. That evening, Evelyn stood in front of the spa building with Lucas. The lights inside were off, but something inside them was glowing, the desire to start over. And Evelyn whispered quietly, "We can lose this place. My titles, my company, even my name. But if I lose you, everything will still feel incomplete." Sometimes, in the darkest moments of life, a person discovers their deepest inner light. For Evelyn, that realization came one morning as she stood behind the giant windows of her office, watching the city. But this time, the skyscrapers didn't look like symbols of power, they looked like heights she could fall from. That morning, a news piece aired on a media channel, revealing every detail of Evelyn's past, the one she had spent years trying to suppress. The headline was brutal: "Strong Woman, Silent Scandals." The report included interviews with some of the women she had once fired under corporate pressure, photos from her secret visit to Lucas's spa, and some doctored private emails leaked by Charles. When Evelyn looked at the screen, she saw a version of her life written and twisted by someone else. A portrait drawn without asking, without knowing. But what hurt most was that she barely recognized herself in it. At the same time, Lucas had picked up his daughter from school and was walking hand in hand with her to the backyard. Elena had noticed the clouded look on her father's face, but didn't say anything. Lucas had always admired his daughter's quiet sensitivity. But that afternoon, an anonymous envelope left in the mailbox changed everything. Inside were papers stating that his ex-wife Elena's mother was reopening the custody case. The reason was clear: media pressure, the temporary closure of the spa, and Lucas's relationship with Evelyn were being used as claims that the child was no longer safe. As Lucas read the documents, his knees buckled. After raising his daughter alone for so many years, he now faced the risk of losing her. The thought of Elena, the one thing that had kept him standing through his hardest nights, being taken away from him, echoed through his chest like poison. That night, Lucas didn't call Evelyn. He reached for the phone, but changed his mind. Because in her world, everything was already on fire and he couldn't add his own flames to hers. But the next day, when Evelyn appeared at his door, the words came whether he wanted them to or not. Evelyn had no makeup, her hair was messy, her clothes simple, but her eyes were clearer than ever. When she looked at Lucas, she carried the weight of a decision. "I want to help you, but let it be about equality, not heroism." Lucas lowered his head. "This fight is mine," he said. But Evelyn didn't step back. "Then let's stand together," she replied. Because now, their battles were intertwined. Maybe they could exist separately, but together, they were more real. That day, Evelyn gathered her media team to prepare a second statement. But this time, it wasn't an interview, it was an open declaration of war. In the message she released, she apologized for not listening to the voices of those silenced over the years, exposed Charles's manipulative schemes with documents, and ended the video with a part about Lucas's devotion to his daughter. That final segment went unexpectedly viral. Black and white footage of Lucas walking Elena to school in the morning, combined with Evelyn's narration, dramatically shifted public attention. People were no longer talking about some scandalous relationship between Evelyn and Lucas, but about a bond where two lonely souls had helped each other heal. But while public opinion was changing, the legal system was not. The custody case had been filed, and Lucas's ex-wife was preparing to speak to the media. That week, Lucas and Evelyn had their first real argument. Evelyn had prepared lawyers, witnesses, even a press strategy for the case, but Lucas didn't want to drag his daughter into a media war. "I can't sacrifice Elena to defend myself," he said. Evelyn stayed silent. Because he was right. Some battles, even if won, brought destruction. Evelyn reconsidered her choices and dropped the plan to go public. Instead, she offered something much simpler and far more powerful. "I won't defend Elena, but I'll bring someone who'll remind you who she is." The next day, an elderly woman, Lucas's old neighbor, came to the spa. She carried a small notebook she had kept since Elena's birth. Inside were handwritten notes Lucas had written to his daughter, old Polaroid photos, school projects, even lullabies he had composed. When the woman offered to testify in court, Lucas held back tears for the first time. Because being defended doesn't always require shouting from the rooftops. Sometimes, a gentle touch on the shoulder is enough. Evelyn watched from a distance and realized this was the moment Lucas had transformed his own darkness. They no longer just needed each other, they were a home in each other's silences. But the real turning point came the day before the hearing. Charles held a special press conference. He didn't mention Evelyn's name directly, but he implied enough, presented old documents, and delivered a speech full of arguments aimed at discrediting Evelyn's company. And in the end, he shared a fictional story about Lucas's past, trying to judge a man who wasn't even there to defend himself. When Evelyn watched the broadcast, she knew she had to choose: remain silent or publicly defend Lucas. She gave her answer the next morning. Evelyn Black announced that she was stepping down temporarily from her CEO position. She said it wasn't about giving up power, but about making space for the truth to be heard. That same evening, while Lucas and Elena were preparing dinner in the kitchen, Evelyn arrived. This time, there was no media, no lawyers, no plan. Just a bowl of homemade soup. She looked at Lucas. "I'm not here to win anymore. I'm here to heal," she said. Lucas smiled. After hugging her father, Elena turned to Evelyn and asked, "Are you going to stay with us?" Evelyn knelt down and looked into the girl's eyes. "If you want me to." The little girl nodded. "But I like the smell of coffee in the mornings." Evelyn smiled. "I promise, every morning." And at that moment, 3 people sat around a worn but real table, all looking in the same direction for the first time. The storm outside hadn't passed yet, but inside, in that little house, what they were building had a name now: trust. When the day of the hearing arrived, the city was still wrapped in sleepy silence. Inside Evelyn, it felt like a battlefield. The armor she had kept in her closets for years was useless now, because this time, the battle wasn't being fought in front of the public, but right in the middle of her heart. Lucas's hands trembled slightly as he brushed Elena's hair that morning. The little girl looked into his eyes and, without saying anything, handed him a small piece of paper. On it was a heart she had drawn, and inside it, a single word: us. Lucas held that word tightly in his palm, because what he was really fighting that day wasn't the courtroom, it was the lies he had to disprove, the echoes of the past, and the ever-lurking feeling of not being enough. As Evelyn helped them into the car, she didn't look at Lucas, not because she didn't want to, but because she feared she might cry if she did. Because Lucas wasn't walking into that courtroom as just a man, he was going in as a father carrying his entire world in his hands. And Evelyn couldn't bear to watch that home shake. When they stepped into the courtroom, the air wasn't warm or cold, but it held a humidity charged with judgment. As the judge flipped through the files, Lucas's ex-wife walked confidently to the other side with a cold smile. Beside her stood her lawyer, a thick folder on the desk, and a face filled with years of bottled-up accusations. Lucas stayed silent. Evelyn had found a seat in the corner of the audience section, sitting there almost without breathing. The first parts of the hearing were routine: income statements, living conditions, job status. But when the opposing lawyer began attacking based on Evelyn's media presence, Lucas's private life, and the spa incidents, the room suddenly grew tense. Every question aimed at Lucas wasn't really about parenting, it was about tearing apart his character. Evelyn pressed her hand down hard on her knee. She tried to hold herself together. Because being there wasn't enough, the pain of not being able to stand beside him was ripping her apart. Then came the witnesses. When Lucas's old neighbor, the elderly woman, was called to the stand, she stood up, removed her glasses, and began to speak. The tremble in her voice was matched only by its determination, and it shifted the entire room. She described how Lucas would stay up all night checking his daughter's fever, how he worked 3 jobs and never once complained. Even the courtroom walls seemed to react to her words. Then Evelyn raised her hand. Whispering began among the lawyers. A CEO testifying in a hearing she wasn't part of was unexpected, but she was determined. When she took the stand, there were dark circles under her eyes, but a clarity on her face she had never shown before. She spoke of how she first met Lucas, how he had turned down $1 million because he simply wanted to be a good example for his daughter. Evelyn ended her words with this sentence: "He didn't turn down that money for me, he did it for the debt he owes to his daughter. And that debt can't be measured in zeros." After those words, the room went quiet. A deep, heavy silence that stirred something inside everyone present. The court didn't deliver a decision right away. The hearing was postponed. But the atmosphere in that room was already clear enough for Evelyn and Lucas. That evening, when they got home, they didn't speak. They sat in silence. Elena went to her room without dinner, and Lucas didn't follow her because sometimes kids also need to learn to be alone. Evelyn made tea, placed the cup in front of Lucas. And in that moment, Lucas finally turned to her and spoke softly. "All my life, I never really belonged to anyone. Not to my house, not to my ex-wife, not even to my job. But since you came, I feel like I belong somewhere for the first time." Evelyn didn't look at him. She stared into her cup. "And I've spent my life trying to own things. Companies, achievements, people. But with you, I feel whole even without owning anything." That night, for the first time, they lay in the same bed, with so many unspoken things between them but understanding each other without speaking. Because true closeness doesn't start with words. It begins by simply standing side by side in silence. The next morning, Evelyn made a decision. In a letter she sent to the shareholders of the company, she announced that she wanted to step down permanently from her CEO role, that she was beginning a different kind of life journey. She spoke not of profit margins, but of matters of the heart. She didn't defend corporate values, but human ones. And at the end of the letter was this sentence: "Being strong sometimes means stepping off the stage and blending into the crowd. And now, I choose to walk in that crowd next to a man who's just trying to protect his daughter." When Lucas saw the letter sitting on Evelyn's desk, he froze for a moment. Then, without saying anything, he walked into the room. He looked at Evelyn. "Don't think you did this for me," he said. Evelyn smiled slightly. "No, I did it for myself. But when I'm with you, life feels more real." Lucas stepped closer. "So you're staying?" Evelyn nodded. "I don't want to leave anymore." That night, little Elena came up to her father and said, "In my dream today, Mom didn't leave you." Lucas's heart trembled. Evelyn gently stroked the girl's hair. "Dreams sometimes remind us what we miss," she said. The little girl closed her eyes and added, "But now, even when I wake up, I feel good." And in that moment, the three of them weren't just sharing a roof, but a future. At sunrise, Evelyn had learned how to brew tea in Lucas's kitchen. Just a few months ago, she used to start her day with French coffee and a meeting agenda. But now, she realized that mornings were waking up to their own rhythm in a small kitchen, in a home where Elena's heart-shaped drawing was taped to the fridge, and a flower in the corner was almost wilted but still holding on. Corporate emails had been replaced by steaming mugs, and the quiet moments of Lucas patiently brushing Elena's hair in the morning. But the outside world wasn't watching their peace, it was trying to shake it. Charles hadn't given up. His silence wasn't a retreat, but the quiet planning of a coming storm. Evelyn's departure from the company may have looked like a victory to the public, but for some investors, it was a sign of weakness. Charles saw this as an opportunity and began preparing his final and most aggressive media attack, hoping Evelyn would be completely discredited before she had time to rebuild. Meanwhile, Evelyn took her first step toward reshaping her path. She rented a small, modest, yet character-filled building in the city center. It was going to become a foundation. Its sole purpose: to provide resources and guidance to single-parent families, low-income women, and those looking for a new beginning. The first time Evelyn walked into the building, she touched its bare walls. There was no CEO title, no chauffeur, no PR consultant by her side, just herself. She ran her hands along the wall and took a deep breath. In that moment, she knew she had just made the most meaningful investment of her life. But the quiet construction of happiness doesn't silence loud destruction. And Charles knew that very well. One morning, Evelyn woke up to an anonymous message on her phone. Get ready. This time, your hero won't be the savior, he'll be the target. Attached was a preview of an interview with Lucas's ex-wife. The headline read, I'm fighting for my daughter's safety. That man forgot himself in another woman's shadow. Evelyn's hands trembled as she set the phone down. Because this time, the target was Lucas. And the most dangerous part was that everything he loved could be shaken without him needing to lift a finger. Lucas hadn't seen the message yet. He'd returned from school with Elena and was making soup in the kitchen, still folding towels out of habit. Evelyn quietly walked up to him and explained what had happened. Lucas didn't react at first. Then he walked to the kitchen door and left without saying a word. Evelyn didn't follow, because sometimes the most powerful way to understand someone is to have the courage to let them be alone. Lucas's walk led him without even realizing to the front of the spa. It had been closed for months. Inside was empty, but the words still hung on the glass door. Peace for the soul, silence for the body. When he saw those words, a sting hit his chest. He remembered the first night Evelyn arrived, how he had draped a blanket over her shoulders, and the peace that settled over her face as she closed her eyes. That woman was now fighting for him, but the world still defined her by money. Lucas went inside, stepped into one of the long-closed rooms, and sat on the floor. He just breathed, just thought, who he was, what he stood for, what he believed in. And in that moment, he made his decision. He wouldn't run. He would tell his own story. That evening, when he returned to Evelyn, his expression wasn't harsh, but it was firm. I came to help you, Evelyn, but now I need help too. In that sentence, Evelyn didn't hear surrender, she heard brave acceptance. Together, in a small recording studio, they recorded Lucas's speech. No makeup, simple lighting, plain setting. Lucas just said, I wasn't alone as a father. There was a girl who stayed with me. I became human again with her. Just because someone stands by me now doesn't mean I've lost myself. On the contrary, become more of who I am. The video was posted. At first, it didn't get many views. But then, a tweet by another father changed everything. Quiet men aren't heroes. But every hero breaks his silence one day for a little girl. The video spread within hours. Lucas became a figure in the media, but not as a scandal or spectacle. This time, he was seen as a new kind of man. One who knows how to love without tears, resist without shouting, and stay without being abandoned. But Charles didn't stop there. This time, through Lucas's ex-wife, he added a claim to the court file that Lucas had worked off the books during his spa period. Officially, it was framed as tax misconduct and an unstable source of income for a child. Lucas said nothing. But for the first time, Evelyn didn't hold back her anger. She went to Charles's office. As he expected, she didn't yell, didn't threaten. She just placed a file in front of him. It showed that Evelyn had transferred her assets to the foundation she was building. And then she said, I'm no longer trying to beat you, because you're not worth fighting anymore. When Charles heard those words, he was silent. Because Evelyn was no longer just a strong woman, she had become a healing force. And that was something he could never own. When she got home, Lucas was sitting on the porch. He still held Elena's drawing with the word us on it unwrinkled. Evelyn sat beside him. They didn't speak for a long time. Then, without turning his head, Lucas said, There are people who want to destroy us. But maybe all we really have to do is keep existing. Evelyn closed her eyes. And stay together, she whispered. That night, for the first time, they held each other without fear. The rhythm of their hearts was stronger than the noise of the outside world. The storm was still raging outside, but inside, in that little house, a life was quietly taking shape. The war wasn't over yet, but something had changed. These people were no longer just running from their pasts. They were learning to stay in the future. On the day of the foundation's opening, Evelyn was placing small flower pots she had handpicked onto the windowsills. There were no reporters, no cameras. Only real people who truly needed help. Inside were volunteer therapists, lawyers, and young mothers. In the backyard, a small play area, children's drawings on the walls, and inside, large thermoses filled with coffee. For the first time in her life, Evelyn gave an opening speech without using words like profit, goals, or vision. She simply said, Some things aren't built to make money but to uplift people. And if there's any hope here today, It's because people who refuse to give up are holding onto each other. No one clapped. They just nodded their heads in quiet agreement. Because some truths aren't met with applause but with peace. As Evelyn finished her speech, her eyes searched the crowd for Lucas quietly standing in the corner. He was there, with Elena's little head resting on his shoulder. No look of triumph, no hesitation. Just a man, a father, and a friend being present. But the peace didn't last long. That evening, as Evelyn returned to the foundation, a group of journalists waiting by the door caught her attention. One of them held out a microphone and asked, "What do you think about Mr. Schneider's old file?" Evelyn paused for a second. She didn't quite understand what the question meant. But when she walked inside, Lucas had already seen the news. This sudden old file referred to a time years ago when he had been fired from a company. Official records cited violation of internal compliance policies, and Lucas's name had resurfaced. Evelyn didn't understand at first. Lucas had never told her. But the truth was he couldn't. Because that file wasn't just about losing a job, it was the punishment for a moment of hesitation. Back then, Lucas had signed certain documents under unofficial pressure from the CEO so that his wife's health insurance wouldn't be canceled. When it all came to light, he stayed silent. He didn't blame anyone. He didn't lash out. The system had silenced him. And now, that silence had returned as a nightmare. When Evelyn learned the truth, her first reaction wasn't disappointment, it was guilt. Because she hadn't been quiet enough to give Lucas the space to open up. She thought she had listened, but some silences require courage too. When Lucas came up to her and said, "I didn't hide it because I was scared. I stayed silent because I wanted to forget," there was no anger in her eyes, no resentment. Only a heavy understanding. "I'm not here to learn about your past," Evelyn said. "I'm here to know who you are." And in that moment, for the first time, Lucas believed that a woman could love not his past, but his present self. But belief doesn't quiet the noise of the outside world. In the media, Lucas was being talked about again. But this time, not as a quiet hero but as a man with a shadowed past. Charles played his final card to exploit this crisis. He leaked to the press that a small anonymous donation made to Evelyn's foundation was linked to Lucas. The report accused Evelyn of political connections, personal gain through foundation funds, and other baseless claims. When Evelyn heard these accusations, she didn't laugh, she didn't get angry, she just sighed. Because the way the system punished a woman was by dragging down everyone who dared help her stand up. The next morning, Evelyn sat in front of the foundation building, coffee in hand, Elena's notebook in her lap. On the first page, it read, "You don't need to be a superhero to love us. Just staying is enough." As she read that line, tears welled in her eyes. Titles and positions no longer mattered. What she needed were people who knew how to stay. That same evening, Lucas came to Evelyn with a proposal. "I'm going to speak to the media," he said. Evelyn looked at him without blinking. Lucas continued, "But this won't be a defense, it'll be a confession. Because the more I hide my past, the more they use it to stain you." Evelyn placed her hand on his. "I don't need you to fight. I need you to stay." Lucas nodded. "And that's exactly why I'm going to speak. Because sometimes staying means speaking." The next day, Lucas gave a simple interview on a small local channel. He shared his story, the mistake he made in the past, and how he had stayed silent to avoid hurting anyone. And in the end, he said, "I didn't try to be a good man. I just lived in a way that would let my daughter say, my dad was honest." The interview didn't cause a huge stir, but it reached the right ears. On social media, it began circulating under the hashtag right to be silent. People weren't looking for perfection, they were looking for honesty. Evelyn pinned that quote on the foundation's bulletin board. Underneath it, she wrote in small letters, "Kindness is sometimes just a man choosing to stay." That evening, when Lucas walked into the kitchen, Elena was drawing at the table. Evelyn was making dinner. Everything was quiet, but for the first time, that quiet was full of peace. Lucas looked at Elena's drawing. 3 people, 1 table, a heart in the middle. Evelyn lowered her head. "Was this the family I was searching for my whole life?" Lucas smiled. "It's something we never even dreamed of finding, but we built it together." That night, as Evelyn looked out the window, snowflakes had started to fall. The sky was dark, but it didn't scare her anymore. Because the light inside her hadn't come from being alone, it had come from the courage to stay together. Evelyn turned to Lucas and whispered, "I'm not afraid of anything anymore." Lucas nodded. Because we're together. Winter had come earlier than expected that year. The wind was sharper, the sky grayer, and the mornings quieter. But for the first time, Evelyn wasn't trying to resist the weight of the season. She was learning to slow down with it. She no longer woke up in a rush. She moved not by her calendar, but by the light coming through the window. The morning spent in Lucas's house had taught her that time wasn't an enemy, it was a gift. Packing Elena's school bag together, sitting through breakfast without breaking the silence, listening to every sound from the street not as a threat, but as proof that life was happening. All of these were becoming a new foundation within Evelyn. And now she knew. The peak of her career wasn't a boardroom table, it was this one. A table with cracked wood, wobbly legs, but real people gathered around it. Lucas had started volunteering at the foundation. He quietly spoke with fathers and mothers who came in, helping them not with a title but just by being there. One day, as Evelyn watched him doing yoga with the kids, she didn't feel a pang in her heart or a sense of pride. She just realized something simple. Loving this man didn't take effort. You just had to know how to be quiet. But life isn't always so graceful. One morning, a letter arrived in the mailbox. It was an offer from a major consulting firm, addressed to Lucas. They wanted him to return to the corporate world as a human balance consultant in corporate communications. The pay was high, the title impressive, the position flashy. Evelyn hesitated for a moment when she saw it. She knew Lucas didn't need it, but sometimes, when a life restarts, the comfortable clothes from the past come knocking again. Lucas, however, barely looked at the envelope. He turned to Evelyn and simply said, "I didn't choose this life, but this life eventually chose me. And now, I want to learn how to stay in it." That night, Evelyn prepared a small ceremony. It wasn't a proposal or a dramatic surprise. It was just a quiet celebration of the days they had spent together. In the kitchen, she cooked her own wine sauce chicken. At the center of the table was a candle holder made by Elena out of cardboard. The candles flickered gently. When Lucas sat down, Evelyn handed him a small, thin box. Inside, there was no watch or jewelry, just a key. Evelyn looked into his eyes. "This isn't the key to the house we'll live in. This is the symbol that you're the man who makes every place feel like home." Lucas closed his eyes. Because sometimes, a key doesn't just open a door, it unlocks a feeling that's been locked away for years. That night, when Elena went to her room, before closing the door, she turned to Evelyn and asked, "What are we doing tomorrow?" Evelyn paused, then smiled. "We're going to wake up. Truly wake up." The next morning, the three of them had breakfast together and went out for a short walk. Snow was falling slowly. With thermoses of hot chocolate in their hands, cold fingers in their pockets, and a steady silence in their hearts, they walked. When they sat on a small bench in the park, Elena pulled a paper out of her backpack. She had written it herself. Family. People who don't have to go to each other but always stay. Evelyn couldn't hold back her tears as she read it. Lucas gently held her hand. There was nothing to say, because this wasn't just their story anymore, it had become a quiet declaration they had written together. That winter, Evelyn began to grow the foundation. New volunteers arrived, new families received support. But in the media, Evelyn was no longer just referred to as a former CEO. Her new title was The Woman Who Chose to Stay. Around the same time, Lucas wrote a small book. Its title was Honest Hands. It began like a letter to his daughter, and its first sentence was, "What makes a man strong isn't the position he holds, it's the hands he holds onto." The book didn't hit the bestseller lists, but it received hundreds of letters, because people still remembered the quiet heroes. Months later, the snow had melted and spring had come. Evelyn sat on the porch while Elena rode her bike. Lucas came over, holding 2 cups of tea. He handed one to Evelyn. They looked out over the garden together. Everything was simple. Everything was as it should be. Evelyn whispered, "Sometimes, starting over means losing everything." Lucas nodded. "But sometimes, all it takes is one no." Evelyn turned, looked into his eyes. "And you were that no." Lucas smiled. "And you were that yes." And so, the story was complete. A story that began not with money, but with integrity. That grew not with power, but with silence. And that proved love didn't need big speeches, it could be lived simply by being quiet together. Evelyn, Lucas, and Elena. 3 names. 1 table. 1 home. Ordinary for the world, but everything to each other. Because sometimes, what changes a life isn't a $1 million decision. It's just one person choosing to stay.